Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Thrive Co-Living podcast and YouTube broadcast. Thrive Co-Living is a new concept in creative community building. Sustainable, multicultural, multi-generational, and inclusive, Thrive Co-Living communities are built from repurposed big box stores or other suitable buildings. In this series, myself, Jennifer Hooper, and Thrive founder, Mark Stein, will weave together the tapestry that makes up the physical and spiritual components of this new concept in community living. Now on with the show. Well, hello and welcome to this episode of the Thrive Co-Living broadcast. My name is Jennifer Hooper. I am your co-host along with Mark Stein, the founder of Thrive Co-Living. How are you doing today, Mark?
Hi there. Great. Glad to be back.
I can see just the tip of the Thrive logo on your t-shirt.
Yeah.
You want to show off the goods?
Sure.
Hey, nice. Nice. So that is a great representation of some of the gear that we have on the thrivecolivingcommunities.org website. I got it right that time, right?
Yep.
Excellent.
It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. But you know what? It works. It works. And there's all kinds of different t-shirts out there. And what else is on that website? Do we have hats? And
Not hats, but coffee mugs,
yes.
even a dog sweater.
No
hoodie,
way.
Yeah.
I missed that.
And face masks with Thrive on it.
There we go.
Yep.
You have to show that next time.
Okay.
We are joined today, by Craig Scafidi. Craig, how are you today?
I'm well, Jennifer. How are
Awesome.
you? It's nice to be here.
Thank you. And you are a senior associate with Coldwell Banker.
Coldwell Banker.
You say it. Tell us who you are. It's just easier that way.
Yeah, Coldwell Banker Commercial NRT in the Tampa Bay area.
Okay, awesome. Well, we are super glad to have you here and hear your perspective on real estate, particularly among the COVID situation out there. Yeah. So let's just dive right into that. Can you give us your perspective, your insights on how COVID is affecting commercial real estate and maybe residential real estate if you're familiar with that as well?
I can. I'm not an expert at that. I'm exclusively a commercial broker, but
Okay.
I can probably give a little bit of insight on that because as the residential market goes, the commercial market tends to follow in terms of interest rate adjustments and some trending. So I get asked that question quite a bit from existing customers and potential customers. What has COVID done to the real estate market? And it's interesting, from speaking to colleagues, there's some similarities between the things that we're seeing individually in my own business, and then there's some things that are just odd that I think are unique to I think individual markets, but also even the particular broker, because different brokers in the commercial arena specialize in different sectors of the market: multifamily, office, retail, and industrial. So there's been some interesting. There's some things that are upsetting and likely a part of any drastic or anything that affects the market in any big way, like any kind of economic shift or something. But a pandemic was certainly not on anybody's radar, or certainly we were prepared for. So I have personally experienced some things that I was anticipating, things like occupancy levels increasing and on the retail and office side, seeing vacancies go up, as I mentioned, people defaulting on leases. I've had customers myself that have had to default on leases because of having their businesses shuttered because of the pandemic. So that's been maybe some obvious things that even a non-realtor can see. It's in the news, and just driving around town and seeing businesses shuttered. And depending on where you are in the country, it's probably more prevalent than others. But there's been some bright spots too. There's been some businesses on the retail side that have flourished through this, surprisingly, and that's what I meant by some of the surprises. I've got several that I'm working with that have not just weather the storm, but they've grown actually, and they're the ones that have been able to adjust to utilizing technology as part of their service offering or sales offering, or they have a product that is we used to use the term recession proof. I guess now we're going to call it pandemic proof. And so several of those that have been very eye opening to see, and they're
Can you
actually
give us some examples?
Yeah, without naming individual companies, tutoring is one, just as a general.
Right.
So tutoring services that have bricks and mortar locations have really, in the particular case that I'm referring to, have done very well. They've been able to transition over to the technology and online platform.
Right.
I think in most cases it existed to some degree, but the bricks and mortar offering was a more personal. It was a big aspect of their business, but having that ability to transition over to the online space kept them afloat through this and actually grew their business. So and businesses like that, and well, let me give another example. Another one that was in the an automotive product of some kind. I don't want to be overly specific, but they have done well because and I remember when I started working with them doing site selection for them. I even said this seems like a recession-proof business because when people don't have the discretionary income to do something, they tend to take it upon themselves to do it. And their product and their products, while there's a professional aspect to it with people who like detail cars and utilize their products, individual users can take that and do that. And that was very prevalent through through the pandemic when we were shuttered at home. So things like planting gardens and, washing your own car instead of taking it to get washed or have a car dealer, things like that. So those are two examples of businesses that have really grown through this and they're seeking additional space now. And to that specific point, just to talk about some of the unfortunate trends that we're seeing, vacancy rates are on the increase through second quarter in the office world and in retail. And the expectation is that potentially that it's going to grow even more through the next 3 to 6 months. So we're keeping a close eye on, as best we can, to what that looks like, because businesses, as they begin to shutter and default on their leases, we're going to experience, unfortunately, some drastic shifts in the retail sector, I think specifically, but certainly also in the office market. On the office side, I can give an example of. Let's say like security services and service-oriented businesses, really that could utilize online platforms for their hiring and for a lot of their administrative work. They and others have found a need for increased space or additional space, and we're finding it easy to find that space, unfortunately, because of vacancy rates that are going upward. So. We're just going to have to navigate it as best we can and hope that the people that have gotten into gotten into the online space for working in Zoom calls like we're doing here. Hopefully, we're going to be able to navigate that in such a way that the office market doesn't take a considerable knock. Okay, because it will do. It'll be difficult. It'll be difficult to come out of that at some point. So,
Craig, I think we're finding in several industries, for example, medicine with telehealth, Zoom conferencing, that it's sort of that the pandemic is accelerating trends that were already going on.
yes.
Is that comparable in your world?
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up, Mark. I was gonna go into that, but I wanted to kind of stop and take a deep breath because that's a whole discussion in itself. The telecommuting aspect of the general office worker. I know from people, I've heard from individuals just that I know, friends of mine, who have been longing for telecommuting opportunities, and their companies were unwilling or looked at it unfavorably because they didn't think the production output would be the same. And the encouraging thing about that is this forced them into either establishing that platform or furthering it And from the feedback I've gotten, and I'm no large census, obviously, but has been hugely positive. That the metrics that people were concerned about, salespeople and others, and targets and from a productivity standpoint, have been positive. People have been able to be productive without direct supervision. And like I said, I can't speak for everyone, of course, but in my individual customers that have shared examples with me, they've been very pleased with the output of their staff that have been at home and adjusting to the change in venue, I guess, for that work environment.
What kind of impact have you seen on co-working spaces?
So I have a customer that has a co-working tenant, okay, which I obviously can't disclose, but we are in the process of renegotiating a lease with them, which is interesting because they are in a position where the fact that we're even negotiating it and they're not vacating the space is encouraging. One would have thought in the beginning that of the pandemic that things like co-working spaces would be, as the last place anyone would want to go is to go intermingle with, dozens of people in an open work environment and spread the virus. But what's interesting about those, I think WeWork, who's not a client, but they obviously their growth pre-pandemic was, or their name in the news was certainly pretty prevalent. They were growing.
They're worldwide.
Yeah,
right?
worldwide, globally, and including here in the Bay Area, opening up a couple locations. And I think the timing for those openings was not good because of the pandemic. They were suffering they had some other issues, underlying issues regarding their financial support and those things. The model, and I think the founder of that company, there were some challenges there, but it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because I think the desire to be socially interactive in the workspace, but also as it relates to Thrive, the living space, is going to continue to be something that we're going to see. I mean, the human condition is to want to be interactive and be social. So we're going to have to get creative in how to navigate in that world and with masks and those things. And even the term social distancing seems counterintuitive to co-working and even co-living, right. But yet we're managing, and we will as just the human species. I think we're going to have to find a way. But I think that desire to want to be together and work and share and I think that's going to continue. We're just going to have to find a way to integrate it into new norms, really.
I still prefer the term physical distancing over social distancing, because we are such social creatures, and it's about the physical distance.
That's true.
But
that's true.
That's an aside.
No, it's actually, thanks for bringing that. I mean, it's really what probably should be said, because we don't really want to social distance. We still want to interact.
Absolutely.
And we are, and we're doing it here in this platform. So, you and Mark and I could have the same conversation at a boardroom table and not be any less productive or any less,
engaged,
interesting or engaged. That's exactly right. So to Mark's point about furthering these platforms that were just either, on the cusp of both, not to get off on a tangent there, but I've been reading and listening about the interactive medical space. Online medical space. It's grown tremendously. And I think it will continue. I mean, this will be a new norm, possibly even post-pandemic, but also obviously if and when the next one comes around, we'll be better established to deal with it. So,
right. Yep.
So Craig, you are our Thrive's commercial realtor, and you were one of the first people that I talked to in the Tampa Bay area. Talk a little bit about your initial reactions to it. We've been working together for, over a year.
Yeah, it's almost 18 months. Yeah. So I think it was in the fall of, almost, it's been, we're going on at least 18 months. So,
yeah. So give us your thoughts, your initial thoughts and reactions about it,
Sure.
and how those have evolved as we've worked together.
Sure. I was introduced to Mark through a colleague of mine, and brought up basically it was discussed as a site selection task. And once I met Mark and you shared with me your the concept and you know, the enthusiasm for it that you had and the vision that you had, and I immediately was drawn to it for a couple of reasons. I think number one, specifically in our area, well, a couple of reasons. The first reason was, as a commercial realtor, seeing dark retail, which I know, Mark, that was kind of the genesis of your whole thought process, was how do we make use, how do we create a communal living community, but then also take advantage of potentially dark retail or dark office spaces that are, you know, sitting out there in the world. And
by dark, you mean that they exist,
dark, yeah,
but nobody's using them.
Correct,
they're
correct.
empty.
Correct. And that was a trend that has begun several years ago with dark retail, with the struggles that companies like Sears and JCPenney and Kmart and other large big box retailers, Sports Authority and others, have kind of suffered. So there's been this, I won't call it an abundance. Certain markets, certainly the inventory is greater than others, but there was certainly an inventory of large retail big box spaces. And we've seen a trend of other uses going into those spaces, medical facilities, gyms, and why not habitational? You know, why not a living space to utilize that? So Mark's idea to look at those specifically, coupled with the fact that communal living in general has, I think, for each of us that gets involved in the Thrive Project, I think when you really deep dive into this and you look at it and you realize this has been something that's been going on, it's part of the human condition, really. There's nothing, like we talked about with the social interaction, communal living has been an established norm for the human species for thousands of years. And I think seeing an opportunity to take advantage of real estate that could be repurposed into something like this, coupled with Mark's vision for his personal reasons why he believes that communal living is and co-living has a place in the housing space. It won me over, and there's nothing like it going on, certainly in this area, in this market. After doing a little bit of research in other markets and Mark sharing with me some of the examples, specifically in Europe, which is where it's certainly trending greater than it is here. I just became more intrigued, and then now it's just become a challenge to be able to, and I'm honored to be a part of the team and to really see this come to fruition.
So we've visited several sites that we've decided were viable, and we really haven't talked about those. In fact, I've thought about going and videotaping some of them, but talk about the three sites that we've been most intrigued about, and maybe go into some of the pros and cons and of each of them. There are three very different sites that we've looked at recently.
Sure. So I mentioned earlier that there's 5 sectors of the commercial market in general. There's some subsectors in those, but retail, office, multifamily, industrial, and land. And interestingly, 3 of those that we're looking at cover 3 of those sectors of the market. We've got a traditional big box retail store. We've got a general office or administrative office for a college, a local college. And then we have an industrial site, to say it's an old cigar factory in the Tampa Bay area, historic site. So it's interesting that we actually have 3 properties as subject properties that have potential, that we're kind of in the viability and feasibility phase right now to determine whether or not we should proceed to that next step in pursuing them. So it's interesting that we have those 3. I never would have thought that would have been the case. I know initially, as I mentioned, big box was the primary focus because of potentially it's more abundant in the marketplace. But I think from talking to architects that we've discussed with Mark and seeing other projects where people have repurposed other commercial spaces into habitational units, it opened our eyes as to, gosh, there's a potential for well, let's not only be so myopic in our big box philosophy. And so I thought just in general, that's interesting that we actually have three. So the first, as I mentioned, is a traditional big box store. And it's about 100,000 square feet. It sits nestled right in the central Pinellas County, which is one of the, in fact, I think it's the most dense county in the state of Florida. It's a small county, but tremendously dense. Great proximity to amenities that Mark is wanting to have incorporated into the community. Access to the beach, a lot of square footage, flat top square footage where to incorporate growing areas, aquaponics that I'm sure Mark's talked about, solar, and just general green space, and other amenities that someone interested in a community like this would pay close attention to and certainly be glad to have. That was probably our first one, Mark. I guess it's safe to say it really got the ball rolling. And I did suggest that we need to pick a property and start to work through and realize some of the challenges that come with repurposing a space. Number one, cost associated with doing those things. So it still is. It's available, and we are, we're pursuing all of them in some form or fashion. We're just at different levels with each one in that process. But it probably meets what Mark, you and I initially thought was it checks all the boxes, right? In terms of the location, the ability to build and adjust it in such a way. There don't seem to be a lot of tolerances there that to do exactly what you would like to do in terms of the number of units available, the amenity offerings we talked about. So from all that standpoint, all those standpoints, it really tends to check the boxes. Is there anything in particular, I guess, before I move on to the next one, would you consider it your favorite, Mark, or?
Yes, it's a favorite. And a couple
for no
of
other reason than because it's the first, it kind of represents that, our first foray into it, so.
First love.
Yeah.
But a couple of other aspects of it. One, it's sort of nestled. It's actually bordered on two sides by a trailer park with a decent sized wall, but it's sort of nestled. It's a terrible retail location because it doesn't have easy access.
Yeah, the visibility is poor, correct.
But one of the reasons it's so nestled and is it's got the Pinellas Trail right out in front, which is a 49-mile hiking and biking trail, literally right outside the parking lot. So, and that cuts it off from the retail spaces. So, it's just got a lot of potential. We've had some problems getting access to it. So we'll just continue to see, but that's really it.
With real estate, each subject property will present different challenges, whether it's from a development standpoint or just an acquisition standpoint. There's all kinds of things that can make it difficult to acquire. So, and we won't speak to those specifically, but the next one is as mentioned, is a more has more of an institutional. Well, it was built actually by a private sector company. And has most recently been occupied by one of the local colleges in Pinellas County, their administrative offices and presidential office. Has a less appealing geographical location. It's probably east and north of the big box store. It's kind of nestled in more of an industrial / residential area, but it does have a water feature to it, some retention. It's a fairly large site though. Some additional development could be done on it, but the structure itself has some great qualities to it that lend itself to repurposing it. It's already got, it's got 30-foot sidewalls on it, poured concrete. And so being able to bring habitational units into that and stack them, the existing infrastructure seems to favor that. because it's institutional, it's built to a higher grade or higher level than probably other types of buildings. It is still available as well, and I think that particular one, from a cost perspective, we may end up in a situation, and we're making these assessments now, bringing the building in, in an empty big box store. We've got an open floor plate and 4 walls, or 6 walls if it's configured differently. But there's not a lot of tearing down to rebuild back up. In the case of this building, it clearly has internal improvements done, a couple of floor plates, which in some cases could lend itself to the design that would go in there for a Thrive project. But in some cases, it could be costly to tear down just to build back up. So from that standpoint, that's probably one of the, if there's a negative, I don't want to call it a negative, it's just one of the circumstances of identifying property. We're trying to repurpose a space. So it's not a blank slate. That's probably a better way to put it. In the third case, the industrial building, this was a former cigar factory from the early 1900s here in Tampa, which Tampa's famously known for. In fact, it's called Cigar City, and it's because I think Tampa was the #1 producer of rolled tobacco for decades, certainly in the early to mid 1900s. And it's still known for a lot of it, since some of the major cigar manufacturers are still located here. This is a great building. It's probably, I might call it my favorite, only because I like old buildings. I like unique spaces and spaces that have a story and history, and just have that, as soon as you walk into them, you just feel like if the walls could talk, I'd love to hear what they would say. And but with older buildings come those challenges, the challenges of in repurposing that space, having to retrofit a building to modern day standards, both for storm and for fire and those things. So, but it's the smallest of the 3. It would require us to think smaller in terms of the scope of the project. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think if the building were suitable, and the location, which I do think is fantastic, it's nestled in West Tampa, which is a very established neighborhood, has a lot of ethnic culture to it, very popular, great places to eat, great proximity to downtown and to the airport, and other amenities. The things that make Tampa great. It's right nestled in the center, close to Tampa Stadium, as I mentioned. South Tampa, which is restaurants and places to go. The Riverwalk, which is just east of there. It's probably my sentimental favorite, as I said, for the reasons before. I guess you probably should do that, Mark. Maybe we need to take some photos and even some nondescript ones, and just kind of, there may be a way to maybe get just some general input or feedback from people if they, if you had your druthers and you could pick a perfect site and just maybe see what the layperson just paying attention might throw in there. So, but I think it is unique, just even talking through it right now, that we have 3 very different buildings in 3 different sectors of the market that represent a possibility for the concept. That's encouraging to me, because we're not, as I said earlier, not just so myopic in our search, that we has to be a dark big box store. Well, if it could function in something else, and certainly don't want to overlook that.
Yeah, and the 2 properties that you mentioned last, I see Jennifer had a question, and I'll let you get to that in a second. But both the college president's office and the cigar factory have vacant lots. Right. that we could pretty much double the size. The cigar factory would be probably a total of more like 50 to 75 units. I don't think we could get 100 units in it. But the college campus actually has another parcel that's part of the entire campus that is as big as the building itself, 80-something thousand square feet. So we could create a complementary building and then build some of the joint features, dining and common areas in between. That the college campus also has a huge storage area, utility area that we could make a gym, put a gym in, and some condos. So I think they all could feasibly work for the project. We just have to see when we're ready to pull the trigger, what's available. And I really appreciate the fact that you're continuing to push the envelope and show me different types of buildings and possibilities. Jennifer, I stepped on your question.
Oh, no, that's okay. We can go one at a time. It's all good. I find it very interesting, like you pointed out, Craig, that, there's retail, institutional, industrial buildings, but none of that to me would be zoned residential. So is that a hurdle that needs to get overcome?
Without question. Yes, without question.
And what other hurdles or other obstacles may prove as challenging in a project like this when it comes to real estate?
So outside of the cost considerations, which everyone, dollar signs are what make real estate change hands. When we're doing a feasibility study, that's certainly one of the first things we go to is the use conforming, and is it acceptable? And that's one of the challenges we have really on each building, because each one has their own hurdle to clear from that standpoint. Mark has been very proactive in getting to know and hopefully ally with local municipalities and the development departments, and that's a great thing to do. I suggest that to customers all the time. Get to know your local development board. If you have any interest in doing real estate development, get to know the people in zoning and that cover all the future land use and existing land use, and understand the process of changing zoning, getting non-conforming uses, special exceptions, conditional uses, those things as it relates to what you're wanting to do on the property. And in some cases, they just might be insurmountable. Some municipalities are more open than others for those types of changes. I think the Thrive concept, at least on first blush with those individuals that we talk to at with certain smaller municipalities around Pinellas, have been very responsive and very intrigued by the project. They're not the ultimate decision makers, so while their opinion matters, we still have, there's probably a journey on some of them that's difficult, and it's a great question, Jennifer, because that can stop a development project dead in the water. We run up against, a city or a municipality that just has no desire to move from the current use to habitational. The one encouraging thing I have found in my career is that elected officials like to preserve residential zoning classifications, and it's my belief that it's because voters are represented in that.
Right.
Okay? So
makes sense.
they don't like to eliminate residential to turn to industrial or other type of use. They want to. If there were a ladder of protected uses, I think I would put most residential uses at the top. Now there are density issues that come into that, and there's people that don't like the density and they don't want that in single family neighborhoods and those things. These, with the exception of the cigar factory, which happens to be nestled in a community, because that's really where it was intended to be. Back in the early 1900s, these spaces were built directly in and around, or residential areas were built around that because the workers lived and worked in the same space, which is actually an interesting live, work, play concept, right?
Yeah.
They weren't really living at the office, but they were there a long time. So, and they would walk. And one of the interesting things we learned from the broker, Mark, you may recall, this particular property has a clock on it, a clock tower. And he was explaining to us that many people that worked in labor jobs did not own they didn't own, certainly didn't have a wristwatch, maybe a pocket watch, but the clock tower actually is how people told time in that West Tampa neighborhood. So just as an interesting sidebar, but great question, Jennifer, and certainly something that we're looking into in each case, and we'll continue to look at, because And we're not letting it deter us in the event that we don't. We just have to say, if we find the perfect building and it just happens to not have a conforming use, then we're going to exhaust every avenue we can to get a no,
Yeah.
or to get a yes. And if it doesn't exist, then we're gonna keep pounding it until we find out. So
fantastic, awesome.
I was pleasantly surprised when we met with the zoning officials down in St. Pete, who are usually pretty buttoned up, and they came in just effusive about the idea. And we're having Chris Steinecker, who is the St. Pete Chamber President, on in 2 weeks on the podcast, and he has just been as supportive as he could be.
yeah.
So I feel like the Tampa Bay area, especially St. Pete, is very fertile territory for us. The city sort of emits that let's do things fun and different and supporting the community. So it's been it feels like a very fertile place for the first Thrive.
I agree. I think the response has been tremendously positive, and I think the concept, represents something along those lines. It's new and different for the area. We don't want to make it out like we're originating this concept by any stretch, but clearly for the area, it's nothing that people are familiar with. Even bringing up the co-op piece of this, whether we get into that in detail or not here, but it's given people some new ways to think, and some of these municipalities are more forward thinking than others and are more receptive and responsive to something like this. So I agree wholeheartedly. It's been, and Mark, I know you and I, after we have one of these meetings, it's gotten, I hope never like we're going to expect a positive response, but fortunately for us, it's been that way. So it's a testament to you and your energy and vision, and I think the concept as a whole.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate your support. The stereotype for a commercial realtor is somebody that's very transactional and not very forward thinking, or and pardon me for broadly painting your profession, but you certainly have been anything but that, and such an enthusiastic advocate of the process, and I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate that. That's very kind of you, Mark. I think what I tell people, I didn't do this my whole life, so I've tried to bring into it, I think, attributes and differentiators that are a lot of what I think my parents just instilled in me, but also other business mentors, just about treating customers a certain way. And, and you're right, there are some stereotypes. Jennifer, you're probably familiar with some, having a little bit of a background in commercial too. And, not so pleasing and not so, but I knew that when I got into the business, and I just said, I'll just treat it differently and see how it goes. And thankfully it's worked out for me.
Love it. Mark, any more questions from you?
I think I'm good, unless Craig has anything else that he wants to add that he hasn't talked about, either about the industry and the trends in the industry or about this particular project. Anything else, any other thoughts that you didn't get a chance to voice?
I think just in general, number one, I appreciate you having me, and I'd love to circle back around here in about 90 days on the backside of the election. Actually, election years tend to be a little bit interesting in the real estate world. Some people get real close to the chest with their money, and we've got some forces working against that with low interest rates, and the transactions are up. A lot of my colleagues are having some of the best years they've ever had, which is interesting because historically that's not usually the case in election years, but also add a pandemic and other global calamities to that, and you're like, how is that even possible? So love to come back and kind of reassess where we are and find out specifically on those vacancy rates, and look at and inventory levels, and see if we've got much more inventory to be reviewing versus, and see if those same three that we're still working on are there too. So, and I'd be curious to know, as I said before, I'd be curious to know if any of the viewers have any input on, and maybe we, like I said, maybe we get some general photos of things so they can kind of opine about if they had a perfect scenario and they could snap their fingers and put a Thrive community somewhere, which one of those would appeal to them. So might be interesting to get their feedback.
Yeah, it's
Cool.
a great idea. Craig, if people want to meet you, talk to you, find out more about real estate or a place to lease, how can they reach you?
They can reach me. Well, I can give my information, or I can provide
We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you want to do that offline? We can do it offline, or do you want to?
Sure. So if people are watching this, just look below. It'll be down there.
Absolutely. And
Awesome.
I wanted just to give a quick shout out regarding the Thrive merch. Just received our first shirts, and I wanted to bring my daughter over here, who's
fantastic.
wearing a
I love
Thrive
it.
long sleeve tee.
Hi.
Check that out.
She probably can't hear us, can she? Because you're on your headphones.
Yeah, I just took the headphones off.
Okay. Hey, it looks great. Hi. I love it.
Absolutely. So, that's my
Hello.
Here's the other daughter that wants to get in on it.
There we go. Hi.
Yeah, we've got our own Thrive community here. So
there you go. I love it. That's awesome.
So,
all right. So once again, if anyone else wants some Thrive merch, go to thrivecolivingcommunities.org. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with anybody you know, and stay tuned for the next broadcast. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Thrive Co-Living podcast and YouTube broadcast. To discover more about our mission, activities, and how to find us on social media, please check out our website at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. There you can also learn how you can support this creative vision in community co-living. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back soon.